Good morning, everybody. Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Elisabeth Türk. I am the Director of the Economic Cooperation and Trade Division of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Welcome to session number S24 of the Geneva Trade Week. It's entitled Harnessing Trade as a Means for Strengthening Agenda 2030, the SDGs, the case of Wto Accession. This session is co-organized by UNECE, the WTO, and two missions here in Geneva, namely the mission of Belarus and of Kazakhstan. Special thanks to all the partners for the wonderful collaboration we had in making this session a reality. Our appreciation also goes to the Geneva Trade Platform for its excellent initiative to provide a platform to discuss trade issues. At UNECE, we are particularly appreciative of the GTP's team's flexibility in helping us engage our Russian-speaking audience. The Geneva Trade Platform has assisted us to provide interpretation also for participants who want to listen in Russian. To access this interpretation, please follow the instructions in the chat box. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to quickly take you through the structure of this session. Important for you to know that we have two main parts. We will first have an opening segment. In this first segment, we will have opening remarks by Ms. Olga Algayerova, United Nations Under Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the UNECE. And we will have opening remarks of His Excellency Mr. Yuri Ambrosevich, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Republic of Belarus in Geneva and Chair of UNECE Executive Committee. After this opening segment, we will have an interactive discussion. For this, we have an excellent lineup of panelists who are all very knowledgeable on issues related to sustainability and WTO accessions. This segment will be moderated by Ms. Maika Oshikawa, Director of the WTO Accessions Division. First, Maika will pose a series of questions to our distinguished panelists, and then she will also have a look at the Q&As from you, our audience. I therefore invite you, our audience, our participants, including those joining us from Capital, to pose your questions in the Q&A box. Please do so in English. I guess that was it in terms of housekeeping. Without further ado, let me now pass the floor to Ms. Olga Algayerova, Executive Secretary of the UNECE, to deliver her opening remarks. Olga, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, dear Elizabeth. Your Excellencies, permanent representatives and ambassadors, dear Jana and Yuri, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, good morning. It's a great pleasure for UNECE to co-organize this session with the Accession Division of the WTO and the permanent missions of Belarus and Kazakhstan. I'm especially happy to be here today with Ambassador Yuri Ambrosevich of Belarus, who is the chair of UNECE Commission, and with Ambassador Zhana Aytsanova of Kazakhstan. We have great cooperation with both your countries on trade topics as Kazakhstan chairs and Belarus vice chairs the UNECE Steering Committee on Trade Capacity. Today's event is yet another fruit of this cooperation. So thank you frankly both, and also to the WTO colleagues for the excellent organization. My special appreciation also goes to the Geneva Trade Platform for gathering various stakeholders to discuss matters relevant to the global economy. Such initiatives are needed now more than ever, given the unprecedented crisis we face. My remarks today will highlight the importance of mainstreaming sustainability and resilience in trade at large, and in WTO accessions specifically. According to the ILO, 400 million full-time jobs were lost in the second quarter of 2020. And estimated 71 million people are expected to be pushed into extreme poverty this year. This highlights the need for deep reforms towards a sustainable and resilient economic recovery, one that leaves nobody behind. Of course, these are exactly the goals enshrined in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I thus reiterate to all of you the urgency of putting our energies towards the SDGs. Trade and trade policy have an important role to play in this context, and I want to highlight two overarching factors. One, the SDGs are interlinked. We have to account for this in our work. For example, sustainable trade reforms can promote inclusive growth, job creation, and poverty reduction, thus contributing to the achievement of many SDGs. Conversely, mainstreaming SDGs into trade policy can foster inclusive and sustainable trade. UNECE tools and products such as our regulatory studies on regulatory and procedural barriers to trade support member states in this context and help resolve bottlenecks in trade flows. The second factor is circularity, and this is on my heart. We have finite resources. Unless we incorporate circularity concerns into all phases of design, use, reuse, recycling, and disposal, we will not reach the sustainable future that we want. In recognition of this, UNECE member states decided that the theme of our next Commission session will be promoting circular economy and sustainable use of natural resources in the UNECE region. And I really invite you to join us at that event, which will take place on 20th and 21st April 2021. Trade and economic cooperation are important levers to foster a broad and widespread circular transition. And therefore, UNECE's work on trade and circular economy, including on traceability and transparency for sustainable value chains and preventing food loss and waste, will be also among the topics discussed. In line SDG 17 on partnerships, UNECE is committed to working with WTO and other multilateral and regional institutions and supporting the accession of transition economies to the WTO. The accession process fosters the structural transformation, modernization, and diversification of economies in transition. 16 UNECE member states have already acceded to the WTO. 6 are acceding, and 1 is an observer. Somebody should be muted with the papers. Thank you. We have a long record of supporting this process, but we can do even more. As the UN Regional Commission, UNECE can help harness the power of regional and also sub-regional integration. A concrete example here is SPECA, the special program for the economies of Central Asia. Its members are Afghanistan, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. In 2019, they adopted the SPECA principles on sustainable trade, setting in motion a concrete work stream to make trade more sustainable. We are delighted to support them in this important forward-looking work. Under the SPECA umbrella, UNECE and the WTO Accession Division have worked together in the past, and we look forward to doing more. And just to add, currently we are facilitating our SPECA participating countries to establish their SPECA fund that we frankly hope will accelerate the cooperation and economies. Let me conclude, distinguished guests, by highlighting the clear merit of exploring synergies and cross-fertilization between organizations. Acceding countries face significant challenges, now exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And for this reason, we see great value in joining forces and collaborating with the WTO and other international organizations to assist governments. I offer you the full commitment of UNECE. Let us work together to make sustainable and resilient trade a reality. Thank you.
Many thanks, Olga, and many thanks, Ms. Algayerova, for these really inspiring opening remarks. Let me now pass the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Yuri Abrasevich, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Republic of Belarus in Geneva and Chair of UNECE.
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me? Yes, thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, excellencies, dear Olga. Let me express my gratitude to the UN Economic Commission for Europe and, of course, to the World Trade Organization and the Permanent Mission of Kazakhstan for co-organizing our today's event, which we consider very relevant and timely. We all agree that promotion of trade is a critical element from the range of economic tools to achieve the SDGs. And Madam Algayeva, Executive Secretary of the UNECE, has already referred to the target 1710 that put a specific emphasis on promoting a universal, rules-based, open, non-discriminatory, and equitable multilateral trading system under the World Trade Organization. This brings me to the conclusion that promoting global membership in the WTO has been a serious contribution to promoting trade and to achieving the SDGs in general. Different international organizations have been already working for years to make this particular target reached. Of course, and it should be recognized without any doubts, the most relevant and profound expertise in helping countries to become members of the WTO is in the hands of the World Trade Organization Secretariat. At the same time, other relevant intergovernmental organizations can and should make more efforts to contribute into achieving the WTO universalization. We have just heard from Madam Executive Secretary about what UNECE can offer to governments in the area of trade and trade facilitation. As she already indicated, some of the UNECE subsidiary bodies are ready to meet certain challenges that the governments face in the process of their accession to the WTO. Let me once again highlight these elements of the UNECE infrastructure. First, the steering committee. Second, the Working Party on Agricultural Standards, Working Party 7, the Working Party on Regulatory Cooperation, Working Party 6, the Center for Trade Facilitation and Electronic Business, CFACT. Let me also mention several practical examples of successful cooperation between Belarus as an acceding country and the UNECE, which might be of interest to other acceding governments. First, the UNECE has carried out an assessment of the readiness of Belarus to apply WTO agreement on trade facilitation that has recently become a part of the obligatory package for WTO acceding governments. A helpful and useful report on this issue was prepared in 2018. Second, the study on regulatory and procedural barriers to trade in Belarus was prepared by UNECE in 2012. Third, the report on the risk management approaches for a successful and sustainable national paperless trading system in Belarus, with deep analysis of regulatory business processes, ICT infrastructure, and legislation related to the e-commerce, was prepared by the UNECE in 2018. Fourth, implementation with the assistance from the UNECE of recommendations adopted by the UN CFACT aimed to reduce trade transaction costs and the development of norms and standards for technical regulation and food safety standards in the framework of Working Party 6 and Working Party 7. Moreover, Belarus sees an obvious benefit in the further revitalization of the Steering Committee on Trade Capacity and Standards in the following two main areas. First, in order to facilitate discussions between regional and sub-regional economic organizations at the pan-European continent with the aim of exploring the possibilities of harmonizing their trade regimes. We named this concept as promoting integration of integrations. The first attempt in this direction was successful. If we recall the substantive and representative discussion during the conference, laying the foundation in the UNECE region for economic integration and sustainable development towards 2030, organized in Minsk by the UNECE and the government of Belarus in 2016. I believe that the continuation of such discussions at the platform of the UNECE Steering Committee on Trade Capacity and Standards, with the participation of representatives of the EU, EAEU, EFTA, CEFTA, and others, will be beneficial for facilitating inter-regional trade and ultimately for making the WTO membership and its regulation truly universal. Second, in order to strengthen synergies from all types of efforts produced by different international organizations that are dealing with the trade issues, the famous convening power of the UNECE could help acceding governments to understand and to evaluate the scope of tools available for them in Geneva and probably get a joint tailor-made support from WTO, UNCTAD, WIPA, ITC, and other international players in Geneva. We welcome today's event that allows us, probably for the first time, to exchange views on linkage between the Sustainable Development Agenda and the accession to the WTO. We are grateful to the UNECE for sharing their vision on this matter. It would be also very interesting to listen to the opinion of the World Trade Organization Secretariat and other speakers on this matter. From our side, we reaffirm the effective cooperation with the World Trade Organization Secretariat, as well as with UNECE Secretariat, all along the accession process of Belarus. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much for your very inspiring opening speech. I believe these opening remarks have set the scene on the linkages between trade, post-COVID economic recovery, Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals. They've also set the scene on the different contributions international organizations, including from the UN, can make when it comes to harnessing Wto Accession for the Sustainable Development Goals. Let us now dive further into this specific subject matter by moving on to the next segment of our discussion. It's my great pleasure to now give the floor to Ms. Maika Oshikawa, Director of the WTO Accession Division, to continue the discussion with our panelists. Maika, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and good morning and welcome to the second segment of today's virtual event, Roundtable on WTO Accession and SDG. Really thanks to Olga and Yuri for setting the scene for this session. I see this event as the beginning of a new collaboration, and I think expanding the collaboration between the WTO and the UNECE, especially in supporting acceding government from the SPECA region. And I really like to express my special thanks to Elizabeth, I think whom I met because of this event to make this collaboration happen. And also thanks very much to all the panelists joining us from different parts of the world. It is my great pleasure to moderate this session. And my name, well, you already said, so I'm currently the Director of Accession Division at the WTO, overseeing trade negotiation between WTO members and then countries seeking membership in the organization. We have now 23 countries negotiating to join the WTO, while the organization itself has 164 members. During the last few months, COVID-19 has interrupted trade flow and disrupted supply chain in an unprecedented manner. Pandemic-induced trade disruption have been felt very much in the country, which remain outside of WTO. That is very much the focus of Roundtable today. For this country, the importance of finding and building a resilient and sustainable economic recovery through multilateral cooperation has never been clear or greater as a global imperative. So focus of our discussion is on the relationship between WTO accession and sustainable development, which I have to say is a big topic for 60 minutes discussion. To be a little bit more specific, we are going to focus on whether and how accession processes can contribute to resilient value chain, inclusive trade for SMEs, and facilitate the sustainable transition to a circular economy, which are some of the big buzzwords in the SDG. And of course, we will be also talking about WTO accession. We have negotiators here. As WTO accession have delivered a lot for the countries who have gone through this process, and also significantly for the WTO itself as an institution. Our starting point is, I think, international trade can play an instrumental role in achieving SDG. Well, that's a big sentence. Let me try to translate this more specifically into the context of accession, which, I had to say, it was the first of such exercise. And I really had to be assisted by my team. And I should really thank Elizabeth sort of bring this angle into our work on accession. So this is how my team has come up. So WTO accession can enhance countries' domestic effort to reform their economies in an inclusive manner and enhance their capacity to generate income. Accession have also set new standards for the WTO rules and negotiation to enhance transparency and facilitation, which are essential for development through ease of trade. And why this? Why this sort of a message? So, accession process is essentially to facilitate a range of trade-related reforms to catalyze sustainable economic development, promote inclusive growth, and enhance transparency. So my team has also, identified 13 goals out of 17 where WTO accession can make contribution. Which include goal 1, no hunger; goal 2, goal 1, no poverty; goal 2, zero hunger; goal 3, good health and well-being; goal 5, gender equality; goal 8, decent work and economic growth; goal 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure; goal 10, reduce inequality; goal 11, sustainable cities and commodities; goal 12, responsible consumption and production; goal 13, climate action; goal 14, life below water; goal 16, peace, justice, and strong institution; and goal 17, partnership. I trust we actually have a convincing evidence to support how WTO accession can contribute to this goal based on the 36 country or territory which has successfully completed accession negotiation became WTO member since 1995. These include big countries like China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, but we also have many LDCs and small islands. Together, these 36 countries were members, accounting for 20% of the entire WTO membership today. So with this brief introduction, it is my great pleasure to have, to introduce 4 accession negotiators, some are former, some are current, to discuss this big topic. So please allow me to introduce our distinguished speaker. We have Ambassador Chanuba, currently permanent representative of Republic of Kazakhstan in Geneva, and she's a former chief negotiator for WTO accession for Kazakhstan, which took nearly 20 years to conclude. Jana led the negotiating team for, I think, 12 years. So one of the most complex accession negotiations in WTO history, which was successfully concluded in 2015. And next we have Mr. Hamdo Tinyak, currently the Secretary of Ministry of Foreign Trade and Economic Relations of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Chief Negotiator for WTO accession. So among the 23 accessions which I currently oversee, accession of Bosnia and Herzegovina is technically one of the most advanced accession. And I'm really hoping to see this accession concluded very soon to become and welcome Bosnia and Herzegovina as the 164th member of the WTO, hopefully very soon. Then we have Mr. Badruddin Abidov, currently Deputy Minister of Investment and Foreign Trade of Uzbekistan, and again, Chief Negotiator for WTO accession. Uzbekistan been in this journey for a long time, since 1994. The process really got started in 2005. Only 2 months ago, in July, we have seen the official resumption of this accession process after a long break. I would say, among the 23 accessions which are currently ongoing, Uzbekistan is one of the keenly watched accession by the WTO membership. Lastly, I'm very happy to see Mr. Mark Linscott, former Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for South and Central Asia and for WTO multilateral affairs. During his long career, he was very much associated with the evolution of the WTO, which is, by the way, celebrating 25 years, about 25th anniversary this year. I have no mark from the accession of Kazakhstan, where I was intimately involved from the Secretariat side. I should add that it was Mark's personality, I think, along with others, with a strong determination, of course, from Jana, made this very complicated accession, work at the end. So with this, let me begin the roundtable discussion with the following question. Following questions, because one question has two parts. And I would like to invite, this is the same question pretty much for all panelists. The first part of the question is how can accession processes contribute to the implementation of Agenda 2030 and the achievement of SDGs? Second part of the question is what was most important lesson in your accession experience? For the audience, I can remind them that you can ask questions because we thought, we would like to make as interactive as possible for this roundtable discussion. So with this, I would first like to invite Ambassador Chanuba of Kazakhstan. Jana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Maika. Thank you. Do you hear me? Hello? Good morning. Yes, good morning to everybody. Good morning, Maika. Good morning to Elizabeth. And very early morning to Mark, who kindly agreed to be part of today's session. And I also would like to welcome Badruddin from Uzbekistan and all other colleagues who will be speaking today at the session. So with the first question on SDGs, I looked all these SDGs, 17, which you read, Maika, in your introductory part. And I think that the most relevant to the commitments which any acceding member undertakes are the SDGs goals number 8, which is about promotion of inclusive and sustainable economic growth, and number 9, which is about building resilient infrastructure and promote sustainable industrialization and foster innovation. So what I would like to mention regarding the relevance between or the impact of accession process and the reforms which the acceding member undertakes in the course of preparation of the, for the accession to the WTO on the SDGs, on achievement of SDGs. Of course, SDGs are very broadly defined. And the SDGs, I think in many of the acceding members, governments, incorporated into their national development and particularly national economic development strategies. And in that sense, if the accession process and the reforms which are being undertaken in the course of the preparation for WTO accession will be in compliance or comprehensively integrated into the national development, economic development strategy, then I believe that it will be having short-term, medium-term, as well as a longer-term impact on achievement of sustainable development goals, SDGs. So speaking about the experience of our accession process, I would like to emphasize that we have finalized our accession process in 2015, and 30th of November will be marking 5th anniversary since the date of our accession. And I hope that we'll be able to have a telephone conferencing with our friends who helped us and played great role on 30th November to mark this event. Mark, I'm appealing to you and to Maika and other friends in Brussels and in Moscow with whom we worked closely on our accession process. And you know, Maika has mentioned that the accession of Kazakhstan undertook almost 20 years. Being exact, I think it's 19 years. But we are counting these years since the date of the application made for accession. But I think that the most active were the last 12, 13 years when we were making changes, very substantial changes into the regulatory framework in order to bring our trade economic policies into compliance with the WTO norms. And, you know, every accession commitment which the acceding member undertakes on systemic trade policies or economic policies, they should be, as I have mentioned, integrated into the national economic reform agenda. And then it would be easier for acceding government to agree not so much on the final ultimate outcome, which is the standard commitment text for any acceding member, which is national treatment in economic policies such as taxation and any tarifications, which will be except for import duties, which is subject to negotiations. It's a standard for every member, every acceding government should commit to introduce and to apply national treatment in its taxation policy, in its railway tariffs, or any economic fees which government is applying, it should apply national treatment, as I have mentioned, except for import duties vis-a-vis imported products. So therefore, it's not the ultimate commitment text which you are negotiating, because it's almost the same for every acceded government, recently acceded government. And it will be the same for any acceding governments. But what is most important for negotiators to pay attention to is the transitional periods, which you require in order to make this commitment. And in this regard, the bigger picture, the national development strategies, SDGs, are very important. And any reforms which you are undertaking, in particular in Kazakhstan's case, we had to unify excise taxes, which we applied for imported products, which were obviously higher, and lower for domestically produced products. In a way, it was playing the role of the import duty, but that has been introduced only to those products which are subject to excise taxes, such as petroleum products, alcohol, tobacco products, and luxury goods. So we had to unify, and we worked out the transitional period, because there was no question whether we need to unify or not, because without unification, you will not accede. There should be national treatment in taxation policy. But the transitional period was important, and that transitional period has expired by the date of Kazakhstan's accession to the WTO. And the similar examples I can bring from other policies, such as export subsidies for agricultural products. As we know, in Kenya, in Nairobi, the decision was achieved on gradual elimination of export subsidies for agricultural products. And Kazakhstan is a major exporter, one of the major exporters of wheat. So we have applied export subsidies for our exports of wheat in the form of transportation subsidies. So we had to eliminate these subsidies, of course, at the request of our negotiating partners, by the date of Kazakhstan's accession to the WTO. Again, we have done it domestically in a very gradual way, and we achieved a level playing field by the adoption of this WTO decision in Kenya, in Nairobi, that everybody will be eliminating gradually the export subsidies for agricultural products. And I don't want to go into specifics of our accession commitments, but I think that the lessons learned, coming back to your question, Maika, is that any commitment which acceding member undertakes should be incorporated into its national economic and trade policy and be part of the reform process. Then, when you have this reform package, it's for the acceding country, it's easier to agree on transitional periods and on phase-out periods in order to overcome certain differences in national policies, economic and trade policies. I think I should stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jana, for elaborating on the two questions in a very precise manner. And then very interesting to know that you mentioned the goal 8 and 9. And then we definitely be joining you on the 30th of November for the celebration. And then more specifically, thank you for elaborating on the importance of a reform measure to be, integrated into a national development plan, especially where it requires gradual implementation of a reform effort, so that this accession process embraced by the, entire much broader nation's economic reform effort. Thank you very much for that, with a specific example of the taxes and export subsidies. Now, I'd like to give a floor to Hamdu. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Maika. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you all for the invitation for this session. Good morning, everybody. And I want to say, when it comes to this subject, that this subject, first of all, reminds me and bring me to the situation that I become emotional when I speak about SDGs, starting from the first point to second, third, and other. So my intervention will be a little bit emotional, but enough material to give substance to the eventual decision-making processes. So as you could see, the world is more than ever connected in every sense. I see this as a very positive and huge blessings for the human beings. Today we can be informed about every single disaster into every single corner of the world. Today we know a single digit how many people are COVID positive in the whole world. Today we have statistics about almost everything necessary to take actions towards building back better SDGs Agenda 2030, and else that will make our living decent and easy. It is only a question of the recognition of these facts and a goodwill to take joint actions towards these goals. COVID-19, I want to believe, has again reminded us that we are all just human beings, equal and helpless before these situations. But at the end, we have the same, at the same time, we have a single tool joined for every single man that protect, and it is a mask. To be aware of this thing, there should be some time, we need some times. Unfortunately, first beginning and first reaction was not good ones. Nations was left and alone, left to protect by its own. Helpfully later on, we come to the situation to behave as a globally. And of course, that brings us to the one important value, even in the trade, of course, and it's a competition. And within this competition, we are now in a situation to have more vaccines, and even more we are working together on it. Transparency, cooperation, value chains, and all of these values promoted within this process, within the trade related issues, being confirmed again once more. What new can be said about when it comes to the SDGs and Agenda 2030 and correlations between? All the principles fundamental of the WTO leads to the implementation of the SDGs and the agenda. Prevention of the trade restrictions and distortions. Harmonization of trade policies, adoption of the joint standards, food safety measures, transparency and facilitation principles, application of the TRIPS agreement leads to the better public health, opening markets for the exchange of the technology, industrialization, structural diversification, exchange of the people, scientists, and so on and so on. So all of these are more than obvious evidences of the very strong and very beneficial connections between WTO and SDGs goals. Working on the accession, we work for these SDGs. Yes, sometimes one can think that the concessions we are making are in favor of the other side, but later on, when investments and exchange and employment and all the other benefits comes, it will be the proof of good decisions. WTO accession process, like EU accession process and regional free trade agreements and other bilateral free trade agreements and all kind of agreements, assist us a lot to change our mind thinking towards the global and inclusive ones. Still some issues are open for a certain time without resolutions and the need to be in light of SDGs resolved. One of this issue is issue of GMOs, for example. With the connection to the SDG 1, no poverty, with the connection to the SDG 2, zero hunger, and with the connection SDG 3, good health, maybe some other SDG goals. But mainly when you, especially within the process of the accession, this issue become very sensitive, and there are a lot of different views on these issues from different member states. So speaking about that in a connection with SDGs, there is a open question: how can we respond on this in the future? On the other side, we should develop, using these global connectivities, all means to overcome all governments, to convene all governments to behave towards developing peaceful, humanistic approach, well aware of the SDGs and actions necessary to be done for the benefits of all of us. It could be a task of the different NGOs, various United Nations institutions, and so on. But I have to be realistic and to say that at the end, like it is within the process of accession to WTO, the majority of actions lie on the national side of our own states and our own to implement, to do, and then we can be part of all this global family and so on. So what are the threats to these processes? Uncertainty. Unfortunately, we last year or last 2-3 years, we could see that a lot of trade wars became uncertainty in a WTO even system, uncertainty in protection measures, and so on. So this is one of the biggest threats to the future activities and future trade, of course, connected with the SDGs. We could see that during this pandemic and COVID-19, how much we are connected in the world trade. We lost, comparing first 8 months of this year with the last year, we lost 16% of the foreign trade, overall trade, in comparison with that period. So we are very much connected, especially with the European Union, and thanks to these processes, EU integrations, that starts somehow like in the same time like WTO accession, and that processes lead us to the creation of the market economy, which are almost supported with, of course, different understanding of this fact of this item. Different understanding of different member states, but lead us all time to the creation of a functional market economy in line with the WTO standards, with the of course EU standards, which are almost in line with the WTO standards. That helped us to create new institutions. That we changed a lot of legislation, and we are almost done we just need one step more to become members. And again, despite the fact that there are different concessions asking by the other side, it's up to us to do something to overcome the situation and to become member. I hope that we still have enough patience and enough focused on this issue, and hope that after this pandemic situation, that we can be in a situation to come again with negotiations with the working sessions and so on. So that will be for the time, and I open for the questions. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much to Hamdu. I liked how you frame sort of a connectivity as the opportunity that can bring to the benefit to all, especially at the time of uncertainty, the time that we are going through, not just a pandemic, but also the situation that the world is facing, such as trade war, and then definitely on the accession front, I know that sometimes the work slow down with pandemic, but I think we also have, platform. Now we are meeting, conducting meeting virtually, and if it works, so I hope that you'll be coming back to the negotiating table very soon. Okay, let me move to the next speaker, Mr. Abidov, and then if I could, and because I do like to have a time for, I already see lots of questions from the, participant. I really like to give the opportunity to discuss. So if you could, next speakers, I'm sorry to push your pressure a bit, try to keep the time limit to 5 minutes. Thank you. Adabin, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Excellencies, dear Ms. Olga Algerova, dear Janar, dear Micah, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, allow me to express my gratitude to UN Economic Commission for Europe and the World Trade Organization for organizing this important event and inviting delegation of Uzbekistan to take part in this event today. In our opinion, this event, which is dedicated to the implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals with
I think we lost you.
Sorry. Yes. Good morning, Excellencies. And you hear me, Micah? Yes.
Yes, now we hear you. Yes.
Okay, I'll start again. Good morning, Excellencies, dear Olga Algerova, dear Janar, and dear Micah, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, allow me to express my gratitude to UN Economic Commission for Europe, World Trade Organization, for organizing today's event, which is very important and useful, especially these days. And thank you for inviting our delegation. To our mind, in our opinion, this event, which is dedicated to the implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, is very important, especially with the case of Wto Accession. Well, I will try to comment briefly on two topics. One is on how Uzbekistan's development strategy for 2017-2021 fosters the creation of sustainable economy in our country. And second is how Uzbekistan intends to use the accession process to WTO to achieve this objective. Well, in order to radically increase effectiveness of ongoing reforms, creating conditions for ensuring the comprehensive and accelerated development of the state and society, and implementation priority areas for the modernization of the country as a whole, and liberalizing all spheres, including trade, on the initiative of the President of Uzbekistan, His Excellency Mr. Shavkat Mirziyoyev, Uzbekistan's development strategy for 2017 and 2021 was developed and adopted in February 2017. The third priority of this strategy, dedicated to the issues of development and liberalization of economy. And so this priority envisages implementation of targeted measures to liberalize the foreign trade regime, currency regulation, customs and tax legislation, which creates the most favorable conditions for the Uzbekistan's accession to WTO. In recent years, specific and targeted comprehensive steps have been taken to implement the goals of this strategy. Firstly, I would like to note that liberalization of the foreign exchange market made it possible to ensure free convertibility of the national currency, removal of all restrictions on the repatriation of profits. Secondly, unified law on investments and investment activities has been adopted, which guarantees the protection of private investments, legality, transparency and openness, justice, equality and non-discrimination in relation to entrepreneurship and basic principles of this law. Thirdly, the tax system developing gradually taking place in Uzbekistan. Main goal is to create the most effective and attractive tax system, which would stimulate the transparent conduct of business. Fourthly, work on a drastic reduction of the state participation in the economy had been continuing. As part of this process, the government's shares in large companies and banks of the country are put up for sale. Main goal is to create market economy, which will be built on the principles of free and dynamically developing private entrepreneurship. And fifthly, over the past 3 years, more than 45 legal acts have been adopted aimed at trade facilitation, introducing advanced methods of customs administration and protecting intellectual property rights. In a very short period of time, Uzbekistan has jumped from 166th place to 69th place in the global doing business ranking and to 114th place from 152nd in the index of economic freedom. As a result of the ongoing reforms, the role of private capital in the economy has increased significantly. The number of enterprises with foreign capital has doubled. As of now, we have the companies, enterprises exceeding 11,000. Dear gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, regarding the second topic on the how Uzbekistan intends to use accession to WTO to achieve this objective, I would like to note, as it was mentioned by Micah, so this year was very, if I may say so, historic in terms of reactivating the accession process of Uzbekistan. So we have the, after 15 years of dormancy, fourth working party meeting in July this year. So it was first time ever with the new system platform created by WTO, enterprise system, virtual negotiations. And so as noted during this event by the Deputy Prime Minister of Uzbekistan, His Excellency Mr. Sadar Murzakov, for Uzbekistan, WTO accession is an absolute priority. We consider this process as an integral part of ongoing reforms aimed at further integration of our country into the world economic community and the multilateral trading system. So in turn, we are committed to continue measures aimed at liberalizing trade, modernizing all trade and political instruments based on the principles and rules of the WTO agreements, encouraging foreign investments and introducing international best practices in the interest of further sustainable economic development. It is worth to note that our accession to WTO also aims to solve strategic tasks such as ensuring well-being of the population as well as poverty reduction by creating new jobs. So I would like to also note specifically that during this working party meeting, we announced our intention to accede World Trade Organization as a developing country. These goals are fully consistent with the preambles of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade and also Marrakesh Agreement establishing the WTO. We will put all our efforts to ensure such balance of rights and obligations which would ensure sustainable and consistent growth of the national economy. We build on the belief that liberalization and access to market of goods and services should not have a negative impact to sectors of the country's economy. And first of all, those are that at the stage of formation or modernization have a good development potential. But of course, during our negotiations, we will follow all the necessary and important provisions of the WTO agreements. And so after this fourth working party meeting, we had the first market access negotiations. So we will continue our active accession process, and we hope and we count on support of all member states. And I would like to thank especially the Wto Secretariat for the ongoing and also the permanent assistance in this process. Thank you, Micah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abinov. No, thank you very much for framing your accession strategy in a broader context of your development plan, which is of course reflected as part of SDG. So what I'm expecting that the next time when you are coming back to the working party, you'll be framing this vis-a-vis the SDG. This is going to be, I think, one of the first countries who will be doing that, and I'm definitely looking forward to that deliberation within the context of working party. Okay, now let me move to Mark. Mark Linscott, floor is yours.
Thank you, Micah. Let me start by confirming everyone can hear me. Fantastic. Well, first of all, it's a great pleasure to join this this panel. I'd like to thank the UNECE Undersecretary Algirova, Elizabeth Turk. We discovered that we first met 20 years ago when I was part of the GATS mafia in Geneva. Certainly Micah, my old friend Micah with WTO. The delegations of Kazakhstan, my old friend Ambassador Chanuba, and Belarus Ambassador Ambrazovich, and certainly Deputy Secretary Abidov and Hamdu as well. I think this is a really fascinating question, the interplay and the opportunity to implement SDGs through the accession process. As trade negotiators, our first instinct is not always, what are we doing to implement the SDGs? That doesn't mean that we're not unsympathetic. In fact, between the period when I was in Geneva for a number of years, about 20 years ago, and later in Washington, I was the assistant USTR for WTO and multilateral affairs. In that interim period, actually, I was head of the Environment Office. I was the assistant USTR for the Environment Office, pursuing things like fishery subsidies and protection of global oceans, and through free trade agreements, working on sustainable commercial practices. So, there definitely is sympathy there. With respect to the accession process, and those who know me well know that I'm generally direct, frank. I don't mince words a lot, so I won't veer from that course here. The accession process essentially involves two fundamental dynamics. One is market access. An accession process is a market access negotiation. And secondly, implementation of WTO rules. With respect to the first one, market access, WTO member negotiators, my role in the past was as either a senior official responsible for all WTO accession negotiations, and then very directly as the negotiator myself with respect to Kazakhstan. WTO members essentially seek to squeeze as much access in an acceding country market as possible. I mean, that's fundamental, whether it's the United States, whether it's the EU, Brazil, Ukraine, there is that dynamic. But that process of negotiating on market access involves opening a market, liberalizing an economy, creating an environment that can attract investment and to help a country diversify its economy. And these all are relevant to the Sustainable Development Goals, to economic growth, to reducing poverty, even to advancing equality in an economy. The second area of implementation of WTO agreements, which should allow for flexibility. I think most acceding countries do do experience some degree of sympathy from other members in terms of transition periods, that kind of flexibility on implementation of WTO agreements. There are tremendous opportunities for technical assistance, but implementation of WTO rules is all about good governance, about reform. Others have referred to this as well. Janar certainly emphasized this. Transparency. And these are all very relevant to implementation of sustainable development goals. With respect to individual WTO agreements, innovation, industrialization, the TRIPS agreement, the agreement on intellectual property rights is relevant in that context. The TBT and SPS agreements, those are all about using good science, good regulation to pursue important objectives, which are relevant to the sustainable development goals. And ultimately, becoming a WTO member involves becoming a part of the global trade community. And Kazakhstan has been a great example in that those 5 years. It's really remarkable what Ambassador Geneva has accomplished in terms of becoming a chairperson of important WTO bodies, convincing the WTO that Kazakhstan would be the ideal venue for the next ministerial conference. That's what becoming a member of the global community is all about, and that involves collective action. In terms of ongoing work, we have the fishery subsidies negotiations. Hopefully there will be a good result there. That is so much about protecting global oceans. On your second question, just quickly, lessons learned, and that, frankly, given my direct involvement in the process, was with respect to the Kazakh accession. First, creativity. Creativity is so essential because there will be hugely difficult challenges, issues to resolve, and to be able to do that, it's extremely important for all involved to bring a high degree of creativity to the negotiating table. And I think we did that with respect to some difficult issues in the accession of Kazakhstan, particularly in the area of tariffs. It involved Janar, myself, the EU, our Russian colleagues, Max, et cetera. It was a collective effort to be creative to solve problems. Secondly, and this is directly relevant to the Sustainable Development Goals, to be able to see the bigger picture while at the same time negotiating accession. This isn't just about implementation of a specific provision or what are the terms of access of poultry exports from the United States. There's a bigger picture, which is undertaking WTO commitments and for all involved to be aware of how these can promote economic growth, poverty reduction, protection of the environment. I think a session like this makes us much more aware, and we can reflect better on how we can serve these sustainable development goals through the accession process. So thank you, Micah.
Thank you very much, Mark. You started by saying, for trade negotiator, it's not really a sort of instinct to think about SDG, but the way that you have elaborated everything we do in WTO accession, what is market, especially on the rule, implementation rule is very much in support of SDG. And I also echo very much with you, lesson learned on the importance of creativity in the negotiation. And I take this point in the context of WTO, we are going through the crisis, the tension. And I do remember it was very difficult negotiation, but it's really, but it was also creativity because of what people like yourself and Jana were able to come together to try to wanted to make it work. You know, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was really, you wanted to make it work. And then I think accession negotiation really demonstrated the sort of the magic of the, you know, I think multilateral, you know, trading system to be able to come up with creativity to make things move. And I hope that that spirit is very much needed today as we go through WTO reform. And thank you also very much for mentioning seeing the bigger picture. I think we all agree. So we have about 15 minutes for question, and we have received a number of questions, and then probably I would say that probably we not be able to probably respond to all the questions, but at the same time, I would like to go as many as possible. So let me probably start, and this is probably to all panelists. I have seen two questions. Well, since, you know, it's quite rare for WTO and the UNECE to organize a joint session. Maybe this is the reason why very much is coming. These two questions, which is related, you know, what can really WTO and the UNECE to do together to support, you know, acceding government in SPECA country. If I could invite something, you know, what I would like, of course, we all stress in the opening statement, yes, this, you know, collaboration is important. What I would like to ask panelists is please come up with one specific idea. You think that, you know, there's a niche for two institutions to be able to come together for the benefit of acceding government. Okay, could I maybe start with Jana?
Okay, thank you, Maika. I've seen this question in the chat from, I think there were two questions related to this one. Yes, we work very closely with UNECE, and in my previous capacity as Deputy Minister and Minister for Economic Integration, we worked as the ministry. Our team worked closely with the UNECE. UNECE has very special expertise, particularly in the field of standards. And I believe that UNECE could help a lot to acceding members but on TBT and SPS related issues, you know, because these are about standards. And as far as I remember from our accession process, these were technically very difficult issues. And the agreements are themselves, TBT and SPS, they are very complex. And then you have very sophisticated and very technically professional negotiators for each of the product groups from United States and European Union. And then we need to have first the capacity to comprehend and understand what they want from us and what we need to do in a broader terms in technical regulations and SPS side as part of the reform process and preparatory process for the accession. And this was one of the challenging parts of our negotiations. And we have learned a lot, you know, through our accession negotiations and from our negotiators. And we are very thankful that both European and United States negotiators in many ways helped us, you know, to train us on the implications of every commitment which we are undertaking in these fields. And I believe that UNECE could play a very concrete role in these regards. And secondly, I saw as one of the authors of the questions, Mario, who is working in the UNECE, and he asked a question again about the accession process and the role of UNECE and the trade principles. And, you know, I know that the department which is dealing with the trade issues in UNECE, they have done very thorough evaluation or assessment of non-tariff barriers in SPECA countries. So this is also one of the major complicated because, as Mark has rightly mentioned, one of the major aspects of the accession process is market access. It's where you talk about tariffs, import duties, and the binding rates, your commitments. But there are also a lot of issues which are related to non-tariff barriers. And it's also related to implementation of the trade facilitation agreement. So therefore, you know, UNECE, I believe, could also help because of knowing what are the major barriers which do exist for facilitation of trade on the part of SPECA members. They could also help to these members in undertaking very specific commitments in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jana, for this very specific area, one on the standard and another one on NTB, especially with respect to trade facilitation. Let me now move to Hamdu. I know that you are not exactly probably part of SPECA, but still, I mean, obviously, you're tired of UNECE. What can we do for you, two institutions together?
Thank you, Micah. As you know, we have experienced good cooperation with UNECE and WTO Secretariat and all various bodies within these institutions. And what can I say? As a final stage of accession, I don't think that there is so much or some things to be done more, but I want to thank for the cooperation that have been already done. And I can say for the acceding countries in the process, that technical assistance is in a specific field of the process are more than welcome. As Ms. Aitshanova said, very often, maybe not in case of Kazakhstan, but I also believe that in their case, very often we are understaffed, and very often the same people have to learn a lot about the different fields of the accession, from SPS and other things to the IPs or whatever. So it's not. There are enough fields for the cooperation, and it's mainly technical assistance that I see as a possibility for the assistance.
Thank you very much, Hamdu. Yes, no, I think we will be definitely exploring how we can together provide the technical assistance to the acceding government. And this could be, doesn't have to be just accession, during the accession. It could be about post-accession when it comes to implementation of, I think, commitment. Okay, Mr. Abidov.
Thank you, Micah. Well, I would like to echo what was said by distinguished speakers before, by Janar and others regarding the issue of the cooperation of countries with UNECE. Well, we think that UNECE is a very important platform for cooperation during the accession process. And with its divisions on transport, on trade, on environmental cooperation, we see UNECE has very good experience on number of areas. Janar mentioned on standards, on TBT, on SVS, and technical regulation, but I would like to also specify the role of UNECE in the assisting the countries, acceding countries in the trade facilitation agreement provisions. So UNECE has very good experience. It helped with some countries during the accession process, and still is helping in the accession process of Uzbekistan. So we have now one project regarding the assessment of Uzbekistan's readiness to accede to the trade facilitation agreement during the accession process to WTO. And with the SPECA program, of course, SPECA program is also a very good platform for acceding countries. And last year in November, I participated in the economic forum of SPECA. So Uzbekistan resumed its active participation in the SPECA, and we have very good discussion on transport and trade issues. And we see UNECE is a very important organization I would say, the sister organization during the accession process, because we are cooperating with UNECE, and also we found very effective this organization in line with other UN agencies like ITC, UNCTAD, and others. So I think we should use these platforms as much as possible to get the profit and also the effective assistance of these organizations like UNECE, both, as you mentioned, Micah, in accession process and also post-accession process, and on the implementation of important WTO agreements. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm a little bit running out of time while there are still many questions, but Mark, please, what would you say?
Sure, I'm just quickly, and this is from the perspective of a former representative of a country that has not had to accede. We were, an original contracting party of the GATT, and then an original member to the WTO. So we've always been, on the other side in many respects with respect to the, the accession process. I think it's important. Obviously, the UNECE is doing such important work in terms of technical assistance, and Ambassador Geneva and others pointed that out. And I think it's extremely important for the UNECE to be able to communicate that to the members like the United States about that kind of work. And I think there are those relationships, and I can imagine it being challenging at times to get an audience from some of those delegations. But I think creating those personal contacts with delegations in Geneva, delegations like the United States is extremely important. And it's been quite a long time since I've been in a WTO meeting room in Geneva. But the opportunity, much of the accession process goes on behind the scenes. But there are the periodic working party meetings, which are extremely important in terms of stock taking. And I can imagine that if the UNECE is represented in those meetings, to take the opportunity to provide those perspectives to the broader membership, particularly with respect to the relevance of specific SDGs and the accession process.
Thank you very much, Mark, for this very actions-oriented point. I think that's very much an invitation for UNECE to maybe consider also attending accession working party, which I don't think I have seen in the past. So I think, Elizabeth, I think you will need to close the meeting. And my apology to the really lots of excellent questions which has been posed to the panelists. We didn't manage to get through, but this, I think, really, show that interest and the possible area of collaboration we can have between institutional issues specific. So I think let's look through this question together, Elizabeth, in the next page, and then I think we should be organizing this session once again in the near future. With that, over to you.
Many thanks, Micah. I really appreciate it. I think you will all agree, and we've just heard, we had a really enriching session with lots of important takeaways, and I'd like to thank our speakers, our audience for engaging, and Micah, I really would like to thank you for doing such an excellent job in moderating and organizing. So what are some of the takeaways? Let me flag some that I noted down. The SDGs concern everyone, all countries, and it's really important to explore creative ways, as we heard, to achieve the goals or the targets. The WTO accession process, through the reforms that we have discussed, it has the potential to pave the way towards a sustainable economic recovery, and it can really contribute, to the implementation of Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. And what we had today was a very rich sharing of experiences on these potential SDG contributions of accession. And our speakers, they also shared their expertise, their insights on all these intricacies and the technical details of the accession process. So I think from today, we can see that we only scratch the surface, and there is definitely scope for more. There is demand for more, for further discussions on this topic. And this also includes the many new topics that are emerging, like, for example, circular economy. So in terms of already concrete further discussions, let me flag here that we have a small follow-up event scheduled, organized in Russian only, by UNECE Regional Advisor, Mr. Mario Apostolov. And that discussion will take place right now after we close here, and it will continue and offer a follow-up of this sharing of experiences for capital-based officials specifically. So to conclude, if we want to join our endeavors and forces to maximize the contribution that Wto Accession can make to countries' office to pursue the SDGs, it's important to strengthen collaboration. And thank you, Maika, for pinning down our panelists on this important topic. And we heard references to NTMs, TBT, SPS, trade facilitation. We heard reference to technical assistance during, but also after the accession process. We heard about divisions other than the Economic and Cooperation Division in UNECE, and I think that shows the breadth of expertise that UNECE can offer. We also work on transport, energy, environment, and so forth. And we also heard about the importance of communication, creating contacts to delegations like the US, who are also UNECE members. So to conclude, it's by joining forces and by being creative, as we heard, that we can promote Wto accession and sustainability in our respective regions and help our countries to build back better. With that, let me conclude today's session and thank you all for participating. It's been a great pleasure for me to be here in the session and also in the preparation, and I look forward to taking that further. With that, thank you to all and enjoy the rest of the Geneva Trade Week.
Thank you to everybody. Thank you to the participants and thank you to the panelists.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye, Mark. Bye, Mike.
Thanks, Bernard.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We shall organize next event together.
Thank you.
See you, Hamdu.
Bye, Bahreddin.
I'll be there November 30th.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you, Mark.
Yes. Bye-bye. And thank you very much for providing the Russian interpretation. There was a lot of acknowledgement for that. Thank you for
I'm
this.
happy we could do that.
That's another
Thank you, Elizabeth, for everything.
together.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.